What's happening to Vince McMahon isn't part of any scripted storyline. This is real, and it's heartbreaking. Once the indomitable king of professional wrestling, Vince has all but vanished from the spotlight. Whispers are turning into reports, and even Linda McMahon, his wife, has spoken out in a tone that shocked many. The silence is deafening, raising questions that no one ever thought they'd have to ask. What really happened to Vince McMahon? Long before he became one of the most polarizing figures in entertainment history, Vince McMahon was just a kid with a chaotic childhood and a dream. He didn't grow up in privilege and didn't even meet his biological father until the age of 12. But once he did, everything changed. Vince Sr. ran the Capital Wrestling Corporation, a small regional promotion tied to the old-school National Wrestling Alliance. Vince Jr. saw a different future. He didn't just want to carry on tradition, he wanted to reinvent the industry. What followed in the 1980s was a hostile takeover not only of his father's company, but of the entire wrestling world. Vince purchased the company and took a massive risk. He would go national, breaking the unwritten rules that kept promoters within their territories. He poached talent, invested in cable television, and launched WrestleMania, staking everything he had on its success. That gamble didn't just pay off, it exploded. WrestleMania 1 brought Hulk Hogan, Mr. T, Cyndi Lauper, and Muhammad Ali into the spotlight, catapulting wrestling into the mainstream. Vince wasn't content staying behind the curtain. He became an on-screen villain, a symbol of corporate tyranny, and a perfect foil for rebellious heroes like Stone Cold Steve Austin. That dynamic helped define the Attitude Era, one of WWE's most iconic periods. McMahon was in complete control, turning the WWF, later WWE, into a global powerhouse. When he bought out rival WCW in 2001, it cemented his place as the undisputed ruler of professional wrestling. He wasn't just the boss, he was the architect of nearly every moment. From match outcomes to storyline directions to the timing of interviews, Vince's fingerprints were on everything. His work ethic was legendary. He slept only a few hours a night, trained like a bodybuilder, and micromanaged every detail of the product. Even after WWE went public and new stars like John Cena and Roman Reigns emerged, Vince never let go of the reins. But while his public image was larger than life, behind the scenes told a different story. Those who worked with Vince described a man consumed by controls and one who hated sneezing because it reminded him he wasn't in charge of his body, who pushed through surgeries, injuries, and exhaustion without complaint. He expected the same from those around him. Writers who nodded off on red-eye flights would wake to find Vince still working, staring them down. He refused to believe in illness and demanded total commitment. But slowly, cracks began to appear. Insiders noticed him leaning more on others. He would zone out in meetings, forget lines mid-sentence, or vanish unexpectedly. At first, it seemed like signs of age. He was in his 70s. After Albert, some feared it was more. As the 2010s progressed, it became clear Vince was no longer in step with the modern wrestling landscape. Social media, younger audiences, and changing cultural norms clashed with his old-school instincts. Family members like Triple H and Stephanie McMahon began taking on more creative control. When Vince stepped down in 2022 amid serious allegations and an investigation into hush money payments, many assumed it marked the end of an era. But he returned within months quietly without apology, sporting a trimmed mustache and a visible determination to remind the world he was still there. Yet something had changed. His public appearances were rare. His movements were slower, his face gaunter, his posture diminished. For a man who built his empire on power and presence, these were signs that couldn't be masked. Fans began to ask what was really happening. Rumors swirled about health issues, surgeries, even cognitive decline. Behind the curtain, the once unstoppable machine seemed to be breaking down. Now Vince McMahon has taken what appears to be a sudden and profound step back. The man who once craved the spotlight has all but disappeared. No press conferences, no bombastic returns, just silence. And that silence is louder than any promo he ever delivered. For decades, Vince controlled the narrative both in the ring and behind the scenes. But now, with his legacy under question and his health in doubt, people are beginning to wonder, did we ever really know the man behind the character? Or were we just watching the story he wanted us to see? Vince McMahon has always been unapologetic, strategic, and wildly controversial, a man who thrived on chaos and control. His return to WWE after stepping down in 2022 was classic Vince. No apology, no explanation, just a quiet power play that only he could pull off. But something felt different this time. He wasn't showing up at live events, wasn't seen backstage, and when he did appear, the transformation was striking. The swagger was gone. The larger-than-life presence had faded, replaced by a thinner, an older man who seemed to be holding onto an empire that had long since outgrown the need for one person at its helm. His tone shifted too. Public remarks were slower, more hesitant, lacking the fire that once defined his personality. Then came the reports. At first, they were quiet whispers, claims that Vince had undergone major spinal surgery, possibly even a hip replacement. These weren't minor tweaks. They were life-altering surgeries, especially for someone nearing 80. One report suggested the spinal procedure lasted several hours and left him temporarily unable to walk without assistance. None of this was confirmed, of course. As always, Vince in WWE maintained a wall of silence. But that silence began to speak volumes. At the 2025 Super Bowl, cameras caught him briefly leaving a luxury suite gone stiff, using a cane. The clip went viral, and fans were stunned. It wasn't just aging, it felt like a sudden collapse. Insiders tried to reassure the public he's recovering. Some said, he's still sharp. Others claimed, but it was impossible to ignore the stark contrast from the Vince McMahon people remembered. This wasn't the ruthless CEO who locked down billion-dollar TV deals. This was a man who appeared to be battling something much bigger than anyone had admitted. Soon after, word spread that Vince was no longer involved in day-to-day operations. Creative was fully in the hands of Triple H. Other executives took over contracts, marketing, and production. Vince's infamous iron grip wasn't released by choice, it was pried open by necessity. Still, WWE offered no explanation. No interviews, no statements, just silence, and rare, unsettling sightings that left fans with more questions than answers. Was he okay? Was this a retirement by default, not design? Or was this the final chapter of a man who never wanted to write one? Then, only days ago, came the news that truly rocked the wrestling world. Vince McMahon was reportedly hospitalized again. This time it wasn't about ratings or lawsuits, it was personal. Sources close to him described a man unrecognizable, frail, and subdued. The myth of Vince McMahon had cracked wide open. Then came the most unexpected voice of all, his wife, Linda McMahon, known for her composure, her silence, and her role behind the curtain. Linda reportedly confided to a friend, "Something is deeply wrong. He's not the man he used to be, not physically, not emotionally." That statement, quiet, indirect, and raw, spread fast. It wasn't an official WWE comment. It wasn't carefully crafted. It was human, and it shook the foundation of the myth Vince had built. Wrestlers and producers began speaking out, some carefully, others bluntly. Longtime staff admitted they'd seen the changes. The slowed walk, the shorter meetings, the fading presence. And all the while, WWE kept running like clockwork. No tribute, no pause, just business as usual. Some called it cold. Others said it was exactly how Vince would have wanted it. But something had shifted. Linda's words cut through the corporate silence. She had tried to convince him to retire years ago, but Vince refused. Now she watches from a distance, heartbroken and powerless. It isn't just about health or business anymore, it's about watching a force of nature slowly fade. And Linda, the woman who weathered everything alongside him, finally broke her silence, not with a press release, but with grief. It was the moment that made everything feel real. And now, as the rumors mount and the silence deepens, we're left with one haunting image. Vince McMahon, hospitalized, frail, and barely recognizable. No theme music, no final promo, no torch passed in the ring, just the quiet vanishing of a man who defined an entire industry. If this is the end, it wasn't the one anyone expected. Vince was supposed to go out on his terms, dramatically, unapologetically, loudly. Instead, we're left with rumors, memories, and emotion. And strangely, there's a kind of poetry in that silence. For all the noise, Vince created the pyro, the promos, the chaos. This moment is purely human, a reminder that even titans fall, that myths break, and that sometimes the loudest thing is the silence that follows. We don't know if Vince McMahon will return. We don't know if WWE will ever acknowledge what's happening. And we don't know if Linda will say more. But we do know this. For the first time in decades, the question isn't what Vince will do next. It's what we will remember. Let us know in the comments.